Hello and welcome back to another episode of Bing Woodworking, the road from novice to pro in woodworking and DIY. Today's video I'm going to go over how I made this table right here. This is a cookie slab from Costa Rican monkey pod. It's about 4 inches thick, it's a beast, it's heavy, and it's a custom height, so it had plenty of challenges, and we'll go over that. I got this slab from a shop in Arlington, Texas called The Woodshed. Shout out to them. It was almost 6 inches thick. Of course, the first thing I had to do was try to make it uniform in its thickness, which it wasn't. It came from the mill. It's rough cut. So here I've made a router sled. I had to put it on the floor because between the slab and the sled, it was going to be wider than my work table. So I found the flattest part I could find on my floor, put it here and started it. So what I'm doing here is I have it set on a certain depth as I'm going through each pass back and forth, and I don't change the depth until I've gone over the entire length of the table. And that's how I'm able to mill it down until I have it uniform in depth the entire length of the table. Now this slab had a large bark inclusion in the middle of it, and that is a challenge that I have to get out because that's basically rot, or it will rot and it'll continue to rot. So here I have a little tool that ended up working out very well. It didn't cut into the hardwood very well, but any of the softwood, it just melted away like butter. This is actually a drywall tool for cutting out drywall, but I was able to adapt it here and it suited my purposes just fine. It really has sped up the process from using the hand chisel. And with a piece of wood that is this thick, there were soft spots down under, spots that didn't appear to have anything wrong with them. So I had to follow those channels and get down in there. And once I was satisfied that I got as much of the bark inclusion, the softwood out that I could, it was time to seal the table. So here I am using my epoxy resin, and I'm just sealing the table. I'm not putting a thick coat on here. It's just a thin coat. I'm just painting it on very lightly and just sealing the table. One of the biggest challenges of making this table from the very beginning was just the size of this slab and how to manage it, especially how to manage it with only one person. So I have this come along mounted to the ceiling of my shop here through over one of the I-beams. And you usually see these things used in automotive shops to lift engines, transmissions, and things that are pretty heavy. But I was able to adapt it and use it for my purposes. Once I had the slab on my work table, now I'm able to start filling in this bark inclusion. And here you only see the last pour. I had to separate this pour into 3 or 4 different pours because you can only pour about 1.5 inches at a time of this epoxy. If you pour any deeper than that, you run the risk of having an exotherm where it gets too hot, can possibly catch on fire, or it can crack, or it can just not cure right. All of which I want to avoid because there's only one shot at this with this slab. If I mess it up, it's not like I can just go get another one or another piece of wood very easily. So here I've got the main part done. I was just filling in some of the outside parts. And this is why you should use mold release before you do this, because while I had it on melamine, that was obviously not enough. And after I got it released and done, guess what? I had to mill it again. And what you see here is after the point that I have given up on milling it myself. I have decided it was time to call a CNC shop and get this thing done. They could do it in 20-30 minutes, but would take me 4 or 5 days of doing this for a couple hours each evening after work. So I'm using that come along from the ceiling again, moving my work table, which has some casters, and there you see some pieces of PVC pipe, and I'm going to use them to help roll it off the table into the bed of my truck. And once I got it in my truck and took it to the shop, they made quick work of it. This giant CNC machine had a 4-inch cutter blade on it and was able to take off between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch with each pass, whereas I was only able to take off between 1/16 and 1/32 of an inch. So not only was it cutting deeper and faster, but I mean, it was able to do this in 20 minutes, what literally would have taken me days. And after I get it back to my shop, I start examining this slab and I see a bunch of these micro stress fractures and some of these voids that are in here. And normally I can fill some of these in with CA glue and go on about my business, but there were so many here after running it through the CNC that I decided that yet another coat of epoxy was needed to help fill these in and get a finish on it. So I'm going to have to lay down a thin seal coat of epoxy again, and it's going to fill in most of those voids. And I can't mill it anymore at this point, so now I need to sand it. And here I'm just showing a little trick that when you get a bunch of grit stuck on your sandpaper, you can just use a whisk brush, clean off that sandpaper, and keep on going. If you leave that grit on the sandpaper, you run the risk of getting the swirl marks in your project, and that is the bane, that is the worst thing for me and for most woodworkers and furniture makers that I can think of, is to have all this work go into something and then find a swirl mark in the last step. So I spent many hours sanding that down. I had to start with 40 grit, 60 grit, 80 grit, and I've got the top done now, and I'm just cleaning up the sides. And then as I keep on going, I just keep on climbing in the grit. I end up going through 80 to 120 to 150 to 180, and I believe I stop at 180 because I plan on using Rubio Monocoat for my finish on this table. And Rubio Monocoat recommends, I believe, either 150 or 180 as your final grit on sandpaper. You don't want to go higher than that because you don't want it so smooth that the Rubio Monocoat doesn't adhere to your project well. So here, after I've gotten the sanding done, I'm using a light to cast shadows on my project so that I can see little crevices, little voids, little cracks. I'm looking for any blemish that might show up once I put the finish on here. So it can be very hard to see under normal light, especially on raw wood. Even though I have epoxy on here, I've sanded it down and there's no gloss to it. So this is kind of my version of taking a fine-tooth comb to the project and looking at everything. And you may not be able to see some of these on the camera, but as I go by and I'm looking at them, I can catch it very easily by using this light from the side, because it'll cast shadows over anything, any blemish that might be here. Then the good thing about CA glue is it hardens instantly, and I'm able to cut right to the sander instead of waiting 24 hours like I would have to wait for resin. Now, another challenge that really had me worried with this table was the base. This slab is so heavy that I was afraid any base would be very top heavy and want to tip easily. And it's going into a family that has kids running around and occasionally has small children running through it. And the last thing I wanted was somebody bumping into a table and this very heavy thing crashing down and hurting somebody or hurting something. So the table base had to be very sturdy. I was able to find a base online that was a chunky style that can handle the weight. However, this table is going to be situated by the owner in a custom breakfast nook, and this nook has a built-in bench. So in order to get the height right while you're sitting at this bench, the table has to have a height that will accommodate it. And this height was not quite a breakfast table height, but it was definitely much higher than a regular dining table height. So I have this chunky style base that I was able to get online, and online this wood is made from rubber wood, from the rubber tree. So now I am faced with the challenge of matching wood that I can't get my hands on and a stain with two different kinds of wood that looks the same. So I tried several different scrap pieces and come to find out that this hard rock maple stains the closest match to the rubber that also gets stained. Not the rubber wood. You know what I'm talking about. So here I have made the blocks that I'm going to transform into the feet or the cleats, whatever you want to call them. Whatever, I'm going to put these on the bottom of the table and elevate the table so that it is at the right height. I've done my glue up. Here I'm just taking my hand plane and knocking off the excess glue, and I'm trying to get it true and flat because it's bigger than what I can put on my joiner, and I have to have a true edge before I can run it through my planer. So I'm kind of a rookie at using a hand plane. I watched many a video on trying to figure it out, and I practiced on several pieces of scrap before I end up trying anything that I'm going to put on this table. So here I'm just kind of showing off that I'm actually able to get a nice thin slice of wood out of my plane like I've been practicing. And here I'm running my straight edge along the side of it, and I'm looking for any light that might come through, and that'll show me whether or not I have made it lopsided or not true on any part of this. It has to be one single plane going through so that I can put it through my planer and true up the other side. So as you can see, I'm going through my planer now. So I was satisfied with what I found there, and I'm putting those blocks through. Then after I've got the milling done on both of those sides, I felt like it was still going to be about half an inch too high with the blocks that I had glued up. So I had to trim off a little bit. And as hard as this wood is and as thick as it is, I couldn't take it all off at one pass. I don't have a bandsaw that could handle this, so I just had to take it nice and slow on the table saw. And while a half inch may not seem like it would make that big of a difference, for this project, with it being probably the biggest and most expensive project that I've made to date, I was just making things a little difficult for myself and being a bit of a perfectionist. Now here you see I've got the cleats or the feet attached to the table base. I glued it together to the table base as well as attached it with a few pocket screws for some extra reinforcement. And then I took a trim router and rounded over the edges, and I had a little bit of tear out on some of the corners there. But I really wasn't too worried about it because I didn't plan on it being just a flat transition. I want to kind of scoop out some of that with the sander so that it flowed a little better. So after the sander, now this is Rubio monocoat going onto the tabletop. Done with the base, back to the tabletop, back and forth, back and forth. But I'm applying the Rubio monocoat here, and it's going on beautifully. This monkey pod is what it's called. The type of wood looks a lot similar to walnut. It's this rich caramel dark brown color, and with this being a cookie slab, you can really see the depth of the wood, the depth of the grain, the intermix of heartwood and sapwood. I did one side, flipped it over. Here's the other side. This is the side that I plan on being the top, and I saved it for last. So as I'm putting this on, I'm not exactly happy with the final outcome of it, and I decided to put on a second coat, similar to the way I would with walnut. So this Rubio monocoat is designed to go on with one coat and be enough, but some of these darker woods, you have to do it a second time. And after I get off the excess here, I'm going to break out the sander again, but instead of sandpaper, I'm using a buffing pad designed for floors. And this is just enough to scuff up the Rubio monocoat, but not take too much of it off. We want to leave it on there as much as possible so that the second coat adheres properly and you get a good, nice semi-gloss. With the one coat on there, it was very matte. I don't want it extremely shiny, looking like plastic, but I do want a gloss to a semi-gloss on there, at least an eggshell. So this helped me get what I wanted and what I desired and what the customer wanted on here with the second coat. And right here, even though it's still wet, I can already tell there's a difference. It's much more rich. It has a different look to it. And I think I'm going to be happier with this. I think the customer's going to be happier with this. I'm glad that I went through the process of buffing it down and putting the second coat on here. So here we're looking at the bottom of the table. I'm drilling the holes to put in the inserts for the furniture bolts to attach the bottom of the table to the top of the table. And during this process, I almost made a boo-boo. I tried spacing it with only the arms put together without the pedestal, and that allowed them to flex. Thankfully, I caught that mistake before it was a huge mistake, and put the whole piece together before I actually drilled any holes for my spacing to be correct. And here we have the final project. I'm extremely proud of this. The feet blend in perfectly with the pedestal. The pedestal is just a slightly different color from the top, which makes the centerpiece the top, which is exactly what we wanted. And I think it fits great in this house. I hope the customer is still as happy with it as they were on the first day. I know one thing's for sure, I've never done so much sanding in my life. And as with the name of this channel, The Road from Novice to Pro, with the completion of this project, I feel like I can no longer call myself a novice, but I feel like I'm definitely not a pro yet, but I'm getting there. So thanks for watching. Appreciate you.